national political correspondent for NBC News and MSNBC, and author of The Red and the Blue, Steve Kornacki, and politics reporter covering elections and voting for Business Insider, Grace Panetta, and politics and journalism professor at Morgan State University, politics editor at The Grio, and an MSNBC political contributor, Jason Johnson. Steve Kornacki, I want to start with you. There are polls that have come out since the debate. Do we have any sense of public opinion since the president's diagnosis?
Since the diagnosis, no. And I think what makes this even more complicated is that since the diagnosis, there's even sort of two levels of this. There was some polling that came out Friday after the diagnosis, but before the hospitalization. Then you have the hospitalization over the weekend. Then you have the ride last night in the SUV. So I feel there's all sorts of different mileposts here that keep changing the kind of variables here. So I think right now what we've got here is, especially through our NBC Wall Street Journal poll, a really solid look, I think, at where the electorate was in those days right after the debate, right before the story of the president and his diagnosis took over everything.
Caddy K.
Steve, I don't know what the president's doing this morning, but he has tweeted 18 times in all caps in the past hour. I don't know if that is because he's feeling much better or he's got a lot of pent-up energy that he needs to get out there, or we know that dexamethasone also makes you kind of jumpy and hyper, so maybe he's not sleeping very well. But if you look at what's happened in the polls since the debate and the claps, particularly amongst seniors and suburban women, really that real drop in seniors' support. Is there anything, do you think, the president can do over the next 4 weeks of this campaign to try and claw back some of that support from seniors?
Yeah, it's tough to say because I think one of the realities here, that we haven't seen margins this big in the 65-plus demographic, but I think consistently and I think critically before the coronavirus, we were seeing evidence of slippage for the president among voters over 65. Because I think there's a certain school of thought out there that, the coronavirus came along, it disproportionately affects 65-plus. Folks in that demographic haven't liked the president's handling on it, therefore you're seeing numbers like this. It's certainly possible, I think, that the coronavirus and the president's handling of it is reinforcing some of the doubts that senior citizen demographic had about the president. But I think one thing to keep in mind is our NBC Wall Street Journal poll last summer, I'm talking the summer of 2019 here, had Joe Biden running ahead of Donald Trump among senior citizens. So I think there might be some more deeper, longer-standing concerns there that 65-plus voters have had with the president. But, yeah, this is a group that, if you look at the exit polls in 2016, were for Trump by a wide margin. So to have this turnaround now where Biden's leading by any margin, that's a significant change. And another one that jumps out at me in our polling, too, here is you talk about the blue-collar white voters without a college degree. Trump continues to lead that group in our poll. His lead is 14 points. That's a reduction of more than half from where he finished there in the 2016 campaign. So, again, it's a lead for Trump, but it's a lead that's not nearly on the magnitude of what he got in 2016. So I look at this moment that Trump's in right now. Here we are in early October. It does look quite a bit when you look at these numbers like early October 2016 when the Access Hollywood tape hit. One thing that Trump was politically blessed with in 2016 was a very unpopular opponent, Hillary Clinton. I think the number, honestly, that probably has to alarm the Trump folks the most in this poll, it's the very simple question here of, do you have a positive or negative view of the candidates? And Biden is 43% positive and 41% negative. He's above water on that question. Hillary Clinton, even when she got ahead by wide margins in 2016, was double digits underwater on that question. There may be just a very basic baseline level difference in how voters think about the Democratic candidate, how they think about Donald Trump's opponent, and that might be driving a lot of this.
Jonathan Lemire, we'll let you ask Jason a question in a second. I just want to go over, though, what we've been seeing in some other polls, the statewide poll. Jonathan, Florida, Donald Trump up 4 in a New York Times Siena poll, tied in Ohio in the New York Times Siena poll, up 4 in Arizona as well. And you look, here's the 5 points, actually 5 points post-debate in the state of Florida. This is a state that just a week ago, Jonathan, you and I were comparing notes, and it seemed that the Trump campaign was getting ready to say goodbye to Wisconsin and Michigan, but focus more on Florida, feeling comfortable about Florida and starting to feel comfortable about Arizona. But at least in Florida, down by 5 points now post-debate.
That's right, Joe. This debate, seems to have widespread effect and is reshuffling the map a little bit here. Yes, the Trump campaign was feeling good about pre-debate, was feeling good about Florida, was feeling good about Arizona. Yes, started to fear that Wisconsin might be slipping away, and therefore felt like Pennsylvania was the state where they were going to make their great push. The president was basically going to live there in the last month of this campaign. That would be the Electoral College tipping state. And now we're seeing the fallout from the debate, and soon we'll see the fallout from this diagnosis. They may just make this climb that much steeper for them, particularly because they have a candidate who's sidelined, who can't raise money for a campaign that's already facing a real cash deficit to the Biden camp, and also, of course, can't be holding his signature rallies, at least for the time being. Jason, I wanted to go to you for a question here. It's my policy to never publicly agree with John Heilemann, but he's right today in terms of the president and his campaign desperately trying to change the subject from the coronavirus. That has been what they've tried to do since March, to try to talk about anything else. That now seems, of course, impossible. The diagnosis here for the president, it almost, as someone put it to me, it almost is a microcosm of how he has handled the pandemic for the nation, the recklessness, pushing people to do a nation to open up before it was ready, leading to perhaps infections, to not touting mask wearing, so on and so on. Do you think here, with this diagnosis, normally American presidents, if they were sick or in a crisis, receive some sort of sympathy vote? There's some people who might, wish him well, and he might even gain some support. Right. Is there any chance that something like that could happen here for this president, with so many people believing what happened to him was his own fault?
Yeah, Jonathan, I don't think so at all. Like, Americans, as a collective, Americans, we're not necessarily the most forgiving people, right? We'll tear you down and then we'll bring you back up. But if Americans think that you're at fault, we're not going to be sympathetic. This is not Boris Johnson. And I think I'll add this. Not only do I think this will not be particularly helpful for Donald Trump, if you look at the recent NBC Wall Street Journal poll, you'll see that he still gets high approval ratings on the economy. But the second most important issue to people is COVID. And while the president tries to separate the economy from COVID, the regular American people don't. They recognize that his failure to handle COVID is the reason that our economy is struggling. And his inability to be responsible himself is a problem. So I'll add these two other things, because I think this is going to happen tomorrow night. Remember, the COVID czar is supposed to be Mike Pence. So even through tomorrow's debate, they're not going to be able to avoid the issue. And I spent a little bit of time yesterday, mask on, with some of the people who were out in front of Walter Reed Hospital talking about how great the president was and everything else like that. Those people, as enthusiastic as they are, they're still the minority. The vast majority of Americans in that surrounding area were sort of walking around saying, what are these people doing? Why are they out there? This is a super spreader event. Any focus on COVID is hurting Donald Trump, and people are not sympathetic. And he doesn't cast a sympathetic character, which means he can't really change this narrative.
All right, Grace, I want your thoughts on this, and I guess to Jason's point as well. Americans don't like it when you purposefully, forcefully make a mistake that causes a bigger problem. And in this case, that super spreader event was clearly just unbelievable, even if you barely believe in the science here. But if you do believe in the science and your doctor has told you to wear a mask to stay safe, looking at that video is hard to watch. How does it impact how people feel about how the Republicans are handling the SCOTUS nomination?
Oh, it's absolutely disastrous on that front, because as Jonathan was saying earlier, that event with Amy Coney Barrett at the White House was meant to change the discourse away from coronavirus. And instead, it massively backfired in the most incredible way. And even before that, there was some evidence that the Supreme Court was not going to be this huge coup for Republicans. Shortly after Ruth Bader Ginsburg's death, there became a bunch of polls that came out that showed that by huge margins, Americans wanted the winner of the presidential election to nominate the next Supreme Court justice. There were a lot of Democrats who raised incredible amounts of money. Act Blue reported raking in hundreds of millions of dollars in the wake of her death. So there was already evidence that this was not going to be this huge political winner for the president. And even then, with the event at the Rose Garden, it just completely backfired. Firstly, because it changed the conversation back to coronavirus. And on a logistical level, it's impeded the ability of the Senate Judiciary Committee to hold these hearings. Tom Tillis and Mike Lee, two of their members, are sick with COVID. Others are quarantining or isolating, and Congress still does not have the proper procedures in place for regular testing and to keep the Capitol, as safe as possible. So it really was a most incredible backfire. And, it showed how, despite the president's efforts, COVID is still really the #1 issue, and everything comes back to this virus.
All right. And the president is in the hospital. The attorney general is there. The vice president. Everybody is in question at this point, whether or not they are safe to be exposed to others. Steve Kornacki, Jason Johnson.